reverently, as if in church, and reached for the shawl draped over the trunk. The garment was rather new, but had been her mother's favorite from the moment of purchase, and now was Paulette's greatest treasure. She caught the hint of roses and jasmine as she wrapped the cool silk around her shoulders. Enveloped in her mother's scent, she unhooked the trunk's latch and lifted the lid. A shadow fell over the contents. Paulette welcomed the gloom, actually breathed it in, knowing this loneliness, this aloneness, was her own fault, and she hadn't even seen it coming. Her mother had insulated her from the grief living in this house full of windows. Paulette had been so completely removed from their pain. She'd spent her days flirting with local boys, accompanying her mother on shopping trips to Paris, and whenever the urge struck her, drawing pretty, frivolous party dresses. The sketches had brought her such joy. Sometimes they still did. They were not the reason she was on her knees. It was the other image. Perhaps, tonight, she would find the courage to destroy it. Jaw set, she rummaged around in the trunk. Her fingers grazed the edge of her sketch pad, just that small whisper of a touch, and the silvery mist of memories swept through her. Hand shaking, she captured the book, flipped to the 6th page, and stared at the face she'd so carefully, lovingly produced with her charcoals. Vicious, complicated emotion rushed through her as she studied the image of her greatest folly. Friedrich Weber, German, soldier, SS officer, deceptive snake of a man with poetry on his tongue and deceit in his heart. Beneath every devoted smile, a lie. Beneath every lie, another lie. Her hand shook harder, almost violently with the black rage of the scorned. She was not the first woman to fall in love with the wrong man. That's what her mother had said when the two of them sat shoulder to shoulder on the rickety cot in her jail cell. At the time, Paulette had been inconsolable in her guilt and grief. She'd begged for her mother's forgiveness between giant gasping sobs. Hélène Leblanc, gracious, even after hours of interrogation, had claimed Paulette was not to blame. But she was to blame. She'd gone to Friedrich, trusting his tender words of love, prettier than any flower in her mother's garden. She'd completely fallen for him and his smooth charm. Now, she forced herself to look at his face. Really look. The rush of breath leaving her lungs was hardly new, and therein lay her shame. That he could affect her still, after all she knew him to be. She touched the curve of his chin, snapped back her hand as if burned. Viper. Liar. Cheat. She should have seen his true nature, though she could hardly see it now. She would keep looking. She would stare and stare until she understood his duplicity and her own recklessness. Only then would she put match to paper. The image began to waver, blur. She had the sudden sensation of falling through fog and mist. Paulette! She jolted at the sound of her name, the sketch pad fumbling in her grip. Hurriedly, she jumped up and spun around quickly. Too quickly. The leather-bound pages slipped from her hand and landed on the floor with a thud. She shoved the book beneath the bed with the edge of her foot and, chin lifted, studied the woman standing in the doorway. Gabrielle, her older sister by a full decade. Brilliant, talented Gabrielle. Even the stingy beam of moonlight embraced her as if in a loving caress. That was her way, outshining them all with her natural beauty and impossible competency. Was it any wonder Paulette always felt somehow less in her sister's company? That wasn't entirely fair. Like their grandmother and mother, Gabrielle had suffered the loss of her husband after only a few years of marriage.